And today, I really want to speak to designing virtual rooms. We're going to be using Adobe Connect to speak to this, although a lot of the best practices that I speak to may apply to whatever technology that you're using. We had a poll on the lobby layout. For those that joined early, if you weren't playing rock, paper, scissors, then you may have responded to the poll. It looks like there was a pretty even split, about 40% in terms of people that have designed virtual classrooms or webinars or virtual rooms before versus those that don't have much experience. I'm going to try to cover both content for both types of people today. And I'm going to actually start with a poll. I'm going to ask you what you think the biggest challenges are when it comes to moving your delivery online, whether it's a classroom, whether it's delivering a webinar instead of an in-person event. What do you feel are the biggest challenges? And I'm going to broadcast these results in just a second. Let's get some results first here. Okay, fantastic. I won't be able to read all of these out loud, but we're seeing engagement, bandwidth, student engagement, measuring engagement, engaging participants, customer computer configuration, engagement, audio, so what he's saying, that can definitely be a challenge. People multitasking during the session. How do you know for sure if you have the attention of the participant? Engaging participants, student engagement, absolutely. Attention span, I'm seeing here. Phenomenal results. I'm going to end the poll here. Apologies for those that may have just still been responding. But that's what we hear over and over again, right? When there are objections to moving delivery online, we've seen a lot of those, especially with classrooms during COVID. People are saying you can't engage people in the same way. What we want to talk about today is how we can create that engagement. There are three kind of fundamental pillars that I'm going to speak to today. The first is content. The second is interaction. And the third is design. I'm going to spend most of the time actually talking about interaction and design. Now, design underpins everything that we're going to be speaking to. You need to design your content. You need to design interaction. But the reason that I've called it out here as its own third pillar is because I want you to think about design going beyond just the content itself. I want you to think about designing the learner's journey in the case of a virtual classroom, or the viewer's or the participant's journey in the case of a webinar. The design doesn't start and end at your PowerPoint slides. The design begins with the invitation that you're sending out, with the lobby that you're creating when people are joining your online session. Your design impacts every bit of that journey. And so I want you to think about design as something separate, as something, one of the pillars of engagement. As I said, we are not going to be speaking a lot about content today, but one of the things that we'll talk about is effective content. Before we do that, though, I want to talk about interaction and ask you another question here. For this, we're going to bring back the Agree to Disagree pod. Now it's just under my photo. People are responding. I haven't even asked the question yet. Well, you can see it on the slide. Is interaction required? Do you think interaction is absolutely necessary for engagement? So click the green checkbox if you think it is. Click the red X if you think it isn't required for engagement. We're seeing a pretty good split here. About 77% of people saying yes. About 25% of people saying no. I think I'm going to surprise most people. I'm going to take the side of the no's in this as we talk about content. Interaction is, I think, really important. It's really an easy way to turn your viewers into participants. When we add interaction, we invite participation. There's a reason that the role in Adobe Connect is called a participant, not a viewer. We want people interacting. But theoretically, you don't need interaction if you've got phenomenal content. If I take a look at a fairly recent example, I went to see Avengers Endgame back when theaters used to be open here in Canada. That was a long time ago. This was a 3-hour runtime. And I watched the whole thing. I was engaged through the whole thing, and it didn't have any interaction. Now, they had a $356 million budget for this, and you guys are probably dealing with a budget that's, what, 10% of that, $35 million for the online sessions that you're creating. I joke, it's probably a fraction of 1%. So the idea that I'm trying to express is that interaction makes engagement easier. It's not absolutely critical. There are lots of examples of people that can create content that is engaging enough to keep people engaged for an entire session. But if you're not using interaction, then you may want to look at whether an online session with participants is really the right delivery vehicle for what you're trying to deliver. If you don't have any participation, then maybe what you're trying to talk about is best served with a video or some other non-interactive content. What we're going to talk about today is really taking advantage of the medium. As we start using these online web conferencing and virtual classroom technologies, we can really take advantage of that medium. That said, while we're talking about content, there are some best practices. And what you'll see as we get into some examples is that it works best when you mix things up a little. Ideally, you're using more than just PowerPoint content. And I understand that for most of us, we think, or many of us, I shouldn't say most, I don't want to throw everybody else under the bus, but for many of us, we think in terms of PowerPoint as we're developing our training materials, as we're developing our pitches for webinars, we are essentially thinking in PowerPoint. But if you can go beyond that, then we can start adding more engagement. And one of the easy ways to do that, as I said, is through interaction. So let's get into a little more detail in terms of interaction. I'm seeing lots of great chat comments here. Keep that up. But I'm going to bring up another poll here and ask you, how do you provide interaction during your online sessions? So 75% of you said interaction is absolutely necessary. What are some of the ways that we can add that interaction? Whether it's a virtual classroom, whether it's a webinar like we're doing today, what are some of the different things we can do to provide that interaction? I'm going to broadcast these results here just so that everybody can see them. Some really great answers. A lot of people saying polls, games, discussions, polling, moderated Q&A. You'll see that we're using moderated Q&A today, as well as chat, drawing tools, breakout rooms. Somebody's saying word cloud. That's something that I've seen before, works really well in a virtual classroom environment, for example. Role plays, small group exercises. We're going to talk a lot about that in the next workshop when we talk about breakout rooms, some of the exercises and group work that we can do together. A lot of people saying polls, video responses, breakout rooms. Phenomenal. I'm going to end this poll for now as we move back to our presentation. I think of interaction in three different buckets. So we're going to look at all three of these today as we look at designing our online rooms. I've broken these up into basics, intermediate, and advanced. And these buckets really correlate to the amount of preparation and pre-work that goes into what you're having to do for your online sessions. So the first bucket is really easy to do and doesn't take much interaction. So under basics, I've got status options, and status options are the options that you'll find under the little raised hand icon in the application bar just above the presentation here. It's actually what I'm using when I add that agree to disagree pod to my layout. You can see that everybody's clicking the checkbox or the red X. Those are just status options. One of the strengths of using status options is that it requires literally no preparation. I can just ask a question, even something I hadn't been planning on asking, something that I hadn't put any preparation into at all, and have people respond to me. It has them participate. By the way, when we get into measuring engagement, this helps because it does go into the factors that we use in the engagement dashboard, for example. Just setting your status to agree or disagree or something else completely. It's incredibly easy for participants to do. It adds that level of interaction and engagement and requires literally no preparation ahead of time. So I would encourage you to use that often. Um, we typically recommend for something like a virtual classroom to add interactions every 3 to 5 minutes. When I joined the Adobe Connect team many, many, many years ago now, that recommendation was 5 to 7 minutes. I think prior to that, it was 7 to 10. We've seen this recommendation come down in time, and I'm even seeing some virtual classroom experts now say 2 to 3 minutes is ideal for interaction. You want to be interacting every couple of minutes. That doesn't mean, though, that you need a full-on exercise in a breakout room every couple of minutes. Something like just asking a question and having people set their status is an easy way to do this. Also in the basics, we'll take a look at using chat as a way to add engagement. There are a couple of tricks I'm going to show you today, especially with Adobe Connect, to use more than just a single chat pod on your layout at any given time to really focus the conversation. This is, I think, something that adds to engagement. If in addition to using just kind of a general chat pod, you create chats around specific topics, you add that level of focus and you keep the conversations on topic. Polls are something else that do require a little bit of preparation, but they're fast and easy to create. One of the things I love about Adobe Connect is, of course, I can create all of this content ahead of time because the rooms persist. So I can create this a day or a week or several weeks before my live session. I can create all of the polls that I'm going to use, place the chat pods on the stage. We'll show you what that looks like today. Under intermediate, things that we may look at a little bit today are whiteboards. And whiteboards, by the way, don't have to be a blank, literal whiteboard. We call them whiteboards here. But what we're really referring to when we talk about whiteboards is annotation tools, giving participants the ability to start interacting with the content itself, using highlighters and markers and pencils, text tools and shapes. That doesn't have to be on a blank whiteboard. It can be on an image that you've uploaded. It can be on a presentation or PDF document. I'll show you an example of this today, and we'll look at more examples in our second workshop around breakout rooms. Breakout rooms, by the way, are another interaction that I've put in intermediate. If they're done correctly, they do require a little forethought. You know, something like a breakout room done properly isn't something that you want to do in an ad hoc manner. You want to set up these exercises ahead of time. Breakout rooms don't all need to look the same. We can set up a different exercise for each breakout room. Audio and video is another really interesting example, often combined with something like a breakout room. What I mean by audio and video is having participants turn on their camera and microphone. You'll notice you're not able to do that in today's session, very much by design. We have hundreds and hundreds of people in the room today. If I gave you all camera access and microphone access, we would dive into chaos very quickly within seconds. So, but it does make sense in a smaller virtual classroom to enable this on a person-by-person basis, or in the case of something like a breakout room, to enable small groups to meet together, use their audio, use their microphone, use their camera when appropriate. We'll also take a look at some examples of what I refer to as more advanced interaction features as well. Things like learning interactions, using authoring tools like Adobe Captivate, for example, to create a quiz or to create a full interactive exercise that can be brought into a virtual classroom where we can have not just an instructor walk through the content, but have in real time all of our participants participate with that content itself. Quizzes are something that a lot of people mentioned in the poll that I had earlier. A great way not only to provide that interaction, but also to test somebody's understanding. And custom pods. We had a rock, paper, scissors pod called the Rochambeau pod on our lobby layout that a lot of you used. We can use pods to do game-based learning, for example. Pods can add a tremendous amount of engagement to your virtual rooms. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these. But before we do that, I do want to talk about design, as I said, as an overall concept. So design is part of your content. Design is part of your interaction. But as I said earlier, I want you to think about design as something separate from that. You know, we're designing our learner's journey or our participant's journey in the case of a webinar. Who knows what this is? Let me bring up that agree to disagree pod here, clear it out. If you know what this is, click on the green check mark. If you're not sure what this is, click on the red X. Anybody want to put the correct answer in the chat pod? There we go. Tracy said storyboard. Yeah, this is a storyboard for a movie called The Star Wars. It was created by George Lucas back in the 1970s. And George used this storyboard, as virtually every director does, to map out the film that he wanted to make. And so he used this to think about the types of shots that he wanted. And each shot got a little square on this piece of paper. And the idea is he can think about the movie from the idea of having wide shots where you've got literally planets and massive ships all in the frame, to something like close-ups where you've got just, a single character filling that frame. And he does this because he wants to move people's focus, right? He's telling a story. And so he wants to shift people's attention throughout the movie to, specific, I was going to say expressions. It's tough to see an expression on Darth Vader's face here, but he's telling a story, and he uses these different shots to tell the story. We're going to look at doing the same thing in a virtual room using what we call layouts in Adobe Connect to really frame the story that we're going to tell, or tell that learner journey or that participant journey, to think about it from essentially a shot-by-shot basis. What do I want my participants to experience? What should they first see when they come into the room? If I need them to focus on a specific piece of content, should I design that, what we call it a layout, differently than I would if I want them, using lots of different content? So there are some really interesting ways that we can use layouts to design the virtual experiences that we're creating. The other thing that I'll show you, I'll bring it up on my my computer so that as I'm sharing my screen, I can show it to you. Joe Cook over at Lightbulb Moment, apologies, has created a facilitator guide. I've got that linked in the wrap-up layouts that we're using today, so you can download a copy of that if you're interested. Is another great way of designing your virtual session before you actually get into the technology. When we're looking at interactions every 3 minutes, we talked about designing that into your session. That can be intimidating. What do I use for an interaction? What questions am I asking for all of the individuals that are in my room? That can be a tough thing to figure out. Believe me, I sometimes have challenges with that myself. What I tend to do is step back and write down all of my key talking points if it's for a webinar, or my key learning objectives if it's for a virtual classroom. And I use the interactions to have the participants essentially help me make those points. So again, if you're struggling with, I want to design interactions into my session, but I'm not sure how to do that. If I know I should use a poll, but I don't just want to use interaction for interaction's sake. How do I design in good interaction? Start with a blank document or a facilitator guide. Write down all of your key talking points or your key learning objectives in the case of a virtual classroom, and start weaving in that interaction to help you reinforce those same ideas. It's a small thing, but it really helps if you're struggling with how to add interaction into your sessions. Actually, let me stay on the agree to disagree. Does that make sense? Just give me a quick check mark if that makes sense. A red X if you think I'm speaking out of my behind here. Okay. Surprising number of people giving me a red X. But the majority of people agreeing with me. Okay. So let's take a look at how we can put this into practice. I'm going to start by sharing my screen and sharing a room that I've already got designed, and then we'll take a look at creating our own room and then turning that into a template. By the way, this is the facilitator guide that I was referring to earlier. You can see here there's a legend at the top. There are as part of the legend, different ways that we can interact, and then there is a chart where we've got our slide number, what the facilitator is doing, what the producer is doing, any technical or interaction notes, as well as the time on the slide, as well as elapsed time. So you're really mapping out the entire journey in something like a Word document to help you standardize this. So what I've got up here right now is essentially a virtual classroom that I'm using for training content. And here, let me just make sure I'm sharing the correct screen here. Here what we're looking at is something that I've set up for manager training. As we're bringing people back into the workplace, we want to train all of the different managers. And so I've created a number of different layouts, and you can see those down the side here. Before we take a look at the content, I just want you to notice the different layouts that are available on the right-hand side. So we're starting with a lobby layout, then we're moving to a welcome layout. We've got something for introductions, PowerPoint slides, a video, an exercise, an assessment, back to PowerPoint, some polls. Just get rid of these chat messages here. Back to PowerPoint, a demo, breakout room. Oh, it looks like people can't see what I'm sharing. I'm just going to stop my screen share and try that over again. Apologies for that, folks. It doesn't look like I can share my Adobe Connect screen inside of an Adobe Connect application. So what I'm going to do, and sorry for the delay, I'm going to open up that same room just in my browser, and that should work to be able to share that as well. I just learned that today. The ability to open up more than one instance of the Adobe Connect application on the Mac is brand new. So it's the first time I've tried screen sharing Connect within Connect. So let me just log into this room. Again, apologies for that slight delay. But now I think everybody is seeing my screen. So again, this is a virtual classroom that I have set up for manager training, bringing people back to the workplace. And this is what I was referring to earlier. I talked about mapping the journey of the learner, in this case, to the layouts that I've got on the right-hand side. So we're starting up here with a lobby layout. We've got a layout for welcoming people, an introduction, PowerPoint layout, video layout, a layout for exercises, assessments, back to PowerPoint, some polls, back to PowerPoint, a demo, a breakout layout, a quiz layout, and a wrap-up layout. So the important thing here isn't what's on each of these, although we are going to cover what's on them and how we're using interaction, but it is that I have built in the design of the virtual classroom into these layouts. So we're thinking about this ahead of time. We are designing the entire experience. The way that Adobe Connect works, by the way, for those who aren't familiar with it, is that all of the functionality is delivered through pods. So I've got a pods menu up here. I can use pods to share content like my screen or some images or PowerPoint presentation. I've got a notes pod, an attendees pod to see who's in the room, a video pod for sharing my webcam, a chat pod for enabling chat, obviously. That could be private chat or group chat. A files pod for sharing files. I'm going to share, I see somebody's posted the link for Joe Cook's facilitator guide. I'm going to share that along with some handouts today. A web links pod for sharing web links, polls for poll pods, Q&A for moderated chat, moderated questions and answers, as well as an engagement dashboard. So the idea is I can add a pod to my layout, and as the instructor or as a host, I can resize that pod. I can put it anywhere on my stage that I'd like, and I can use this to essentially design what my layout looks like, what my stage looks like. And what I keep referring to as a layout is really just a preset grouping of pods. So I've got this layout for a lobby, then I've got a different layout for a welcome screen and a different layout for a PowerPoint presentation. So we're just going from one set of pods to another set of pods. And in this way, I'm really designing that user experience, that participant experience for this particular room. This is, as I said, my lobby layout. So this is what people are seeing as they're coming into my virtual room. I want you to note a couple of different things. So these are the pods that I've got on here. I've got a clock pod because we haven't started yet. So having some kind of indication of when we're going to begin, whether it's a countdown timer like we had in today's webinar, or a clock, or both, to be honest. I like having some indication of, this is how long you've got until we're going to begin. We've got an image here that we're just loaded into a share pod. So as you can see, this is just a JPEG image, letting people know that they're in the right place. Again, we haven't started yet, so having an image letting people know they're in the right place. Another image to let them know how we're going to be doing audio is handy here. And then another share pod that we're using for music down here. This is something else we used in today's lobby. I saw some person asking in the chat, how do you get the clock pod in here? There is actually, I'll go to it in just a second as we can talk about custom pods, but there is a page on adobeconnect.com that will give you a library of different custom pods that are available. The clock is a free app custom pod on that page, along with things like that rock, paper, scissors game that we're using in today's lobby. I've got an attendees pod on this particular layout. Virtual classrooms, I typically do have the attendees pod on the stage because they're fairly small, typically. Everybody knows each other, and I want to encourage that participation. I want to encourage everybody knowing who else is in the room. The other thing that I'm doing right from the start to set the expectation of participation is ensuring that my lobby layout, the area that people are going to come to before we even begin, has got at least two different ways, two different methods of interaction on it. Again, this is an opportunity that you've got to start setting expectations for the session. So by adding a poll pod, by adding a chat pod, I'm just getting people used to using the interface, using their mouse, clicking around. Interaction is important, and we want to get people interacting as soon as possible. Because if they're not, if you're just giving them a screen saying, please wait until the host is ready to start the session, then people are going to go off and check, Twitter or Facebook or TikTok or, start shopping on Amazon or watching videos. We want to give people something to do the minute that they get into the virtual classroom in this case, or the webinar session. The second layout here I've got is a welcome layout. Again, just duplicating essentially that lobby layout, but adding my housekeeping slides and removing things like the music pod down in the bottom left-hand corner. As we go through, I've got an introduction layout that I can use. It's very similar to what I used in today's webinar, where we can do things like start turning on webcams and sharing video. This is a little tightly cropped here. I can start sharing this video, though, to introduce myself. And then, as often is the case, a lot of our content exists in PowerPoint format. So we're using a layout that incorporates a PowerPoint deck, as well as, in this case, I've added the agree to disagree pod, an attendees pod, and a chat pod. We want to keep those interactive elements available. Let me tell you why I uploaded my PowerPoint content rather than using this share pod to share my screen. The reason I want to do this is, first, it takes a lot less bandwidth. When I take a look, and I can actually do this by clicking on the green status options icon in the top right. When I take a look at the amount of bandwidth I'm using, you can see it's, not even a single kilobit. It is tiny. Now, part of that is because I'm sharing audio in a different room, not in this room. But by not sharing my screen, by uploading my content to Adobe Connect, I can keep the bandwidth requirements very small and the quality very, very high. There's no compression here. I've also got the advantage of being able to see all of the speaker notes that I might have inside of PowerPoint, as well as to do nonlinear navigation, to jump to a specific slide without anybody knowing that I've skipped a slide. So I can look maybe more prepared than I am by having my speaker notes available and by doing nonlinear navigation. Really, really helpful way of kind of designing that preparation into your virtual sessions. It works well for a virtual classroom or a webinar. The next layout, I've got a video pod. And you'll notice there is only a video pod on this layout. So we've removed the attendees list. We've removed the chat. We've removed anything else because just like George Lucas has his storyboard where he might want to zoom in on a character to bring the focus of the viewer to that character, we can do the same thing in a webinar or virtual classroom. We can do the same thing in our virtual rooms by having our participants focus in on some specific content. In this case, I'm doing that by removing all of the other functionality. In Adobe Connect, it's the host or the instructor that designs the user experience. So participants aren't able to do things like bring back chat or bring back a poll. It is really the host that has all of that power in this case. So as the host, I'm deciding to remove anything that I might find a distraction when my content is not interactive. So when I've got interactive content, I may want more pods on my layout. Somebody's saying the videos can be distracting. The next layout we've got here, and we'll actually design a room ourselves as well, but I think this is helpful in understanding, looking at a pre-designed room. This next layout uses multiple chat pods. We talked about this when we looked at the different ways, the different methods of interaction earlier. I talked about chat being not just great for interaction throughout your session, but it's something that you can use as an exercise. So in this case, we've got our managers we're bringing in for training to have everybody come back to the workplace. And in addition to my standard chat pod, which I've got over here on the right-hand side of my layout, I've added 3 additional chat pods. So in Adobe Connect, you can add more than one instance of a lot of these pods, most of these pods. If I want to add a 5th chat pod, I can just go up and say add a new 5th chat pod. I can move it to wherever I'd like to have it. In this case, I'm just going to hide it for now. But you can see that by double-clicking the top of this chat pod, I can give it a specific name. I can ask a specific question. By the way, I got the word question in here, was literally going in and editing my information and changing my name to question, hitting save, asking the question, and then I changed my name back using edit information. But we've got specific topics now. So get involved. How are you going to contribute to common area precautions, protecting vulnerable employees, sanitizing the workspace? This is a great way to focus the conversations that you're having, to turn a chat pod from just a kind of a standard way to interact into a real exercise where, again, we're able to increase that level of engagement because we have this focus. We have specific topics and conversations happening. It's much more effective than simply using your generic chat pod that you've got maybe on every layout. Really think out of the box about how you might use chat in the webinars that you're delivering or the virtual classrooms in particular that you're setting up. This next layout features an assessment. This is something that was created in Adobe Captivate in this case. We're able to bring it into our live virtual classroom. This is what I have in the advanced bucket. This does take more preparation. In this case, it was some content that we authored in an e-learning authoring tool, and we're bringing it into, in this case, Adobe Connect as our virtual classroom. This is so effective, though, because as an instructor, I can go through these first few slides and speak over them. But as we get into some of the other slides, we can unsynchronize this, and you'll see it can actually unsynchronize automatically to give each participant the ability to participate with the content, to interact with the content. So this doesn't just have to be a view only. In this case, it is a drag and drop exercise where everybody in the virtual classroom, in this case, interacts with the content itself. Again, that's not quite as easy to do as maybe a poll would be to set up, but the payoff is huge. The more work that we go into designing these virtual experiences, I think the more effective some of these interactive elements can be. The trick really is to mix them up so that you're using, as much as possible, more than one type of content and more than one way to interact with people. Today we've used polls, but we've also used the status options with agree to disagree. We're also using chat. You'll notice I've also designed in multiple PowerPoint layouts into this particular classroom. These are practically identical with each other, but I want to remind myself that after the assessment, we go back to PowerPoint. And so even though this is an identical layout to this one, and I could serve the same purpose just by clicking back on this layout, by having it essentially duplicated in my layout bar, it is giving me a hint. It is helping me understand the flow of my session, that after the assessment, we go back to PowerPoint. Then we've got some polls. In Adobe Connect, you'll see here, we've got 3 different types of polls. We've got, in the bottom right-hand corner here, you can see a multiple choice poll with radio buttons. I can select one of these different options, but I can't select more than one. This is very common as a poll type. We've also got multiple answer polls. In this case, we're using checkboxes instead of radio buttons because you're able to select more than one option. So with a multiple answer, it uses checkboxes. And then the third type of poll that we can design into our experience here is a short answer poll. And this is what I was using in today's session to ask all of those questions. We're going back to PowerPoint. We've got a demo layout, which is just a screen share. A breakout layout. We're going to cover that in our workshop. We're going to come close to finishing this off with a quiz. So this is a custom pod. Let me address the custom pods right now because I saw a few questions about that in the chat pod. So we're going to go to apps.adobeconnect.com. If I could ask one of my colleagues to add that link into the chat pod. You'll notice on this page there are a bunch of different custom pods. Many of these are free. Some of them have a fee associated with them. It's very similar to the App Store on an iPhone or the Google Play Store on Android. You can download these apps. So if you want that rock, paper, scissors game, here's the Rochambeau. Here's the clock that somebody was asking about earlier. Simply click on Learn More. It should bring up a page with a download button. Or if it does require a fee, it might guide you to somebody else's site. I can simply download that and then upload it to a share pod in my Adobe Connect room. And so the pod that we're using in the room that I'm showing off is this Quiz Connect pod. This is actually something that I created as a way to do game-based learning, to add a quiz. This is free, by the way, if anybody wants to use it in Adobe Connect. You can load in a quiz to test people's understanding, but also turn it into a game. So the faster that you answer these questions, the more points that you'll get. And we can see high scores so people can compete against each other. We can turn this into game-based learning, not gamification, but game-based learning. I've also got a wrap-up layout in this particular virtual classroom where we're distributing things like our files that we used, web links. We've got notes summarizing everything that we talked about. We've got more interaction by helping people tell us whether we actually met the learning objectives or not. You know, do you feel prepared to come back into the office or to discuss coming back into the office with your employees? So this is a great way to wrap things up. The other things that I love about this particular technology that we're using with Adobe Connect here is that these types of interactive elements maintain their interactivity even when you're watching the recording. So if somebody's watching the recording here, they're still going to be able to download the files in the file share pod. They're still going to be able to click the links, copy and paste the text here from the notes pod. I love that feature of Connect recordings. And by adding these interactive elements, we're not removing them from somebody who may be watching this after the live session. Okay, let's build this into our own virtual classroom. I'm going to try to do this fairly quickly because I do want to wrap up by giving you some handouts, kind of going over those and answering questions. But let me just go to my account here, and I'll create a brand new room. We'll just do a really quick version. Let's call this Design Workshop. And I'm going to call it template here, and you'll see why in a second. I'm not going to worry about a custom URL, although I could give it a specific name. I'm going to allow anybody who's got the URL to come in. Not going to worry about any of these. I'm just going to hit finish. And I know now that I need to open this up in a browser because I can't screen share it otherwise. So let me just copy this link. And the trick to forcing a room to open up in a browser is adding this HTML view equals true. So this is a brand new room created with the default meeting template. What we're going to do right now, in about 5 or 6 minutes, is create our own template, something that may work better for us, that adds some of these key design points that we've been discussing. So I'm going to start by creating a new lobby layout. I'm going to do that by clicking on the plus button. We're going to create a new layout. We'll just call it lobby here. So I'll hit create layout. And I'm taken to a literal blank screen. And so one of the things that I like to do, speaking personally, is start with a background image just to make things look a little more interesting. We had somebody, actually, before we even started today, ask, where do you get background images from? I'm going to show you where I often go to get background images, and that's to stock.adobe.com. And there is a button called free up here on stock.adobe.com. Really, I mean, I understand why they don't put it up and to the left. It kind of gets hidden. But when you click on the free button, you can see free stock assets, and they are all categorized. And there is a category called backgrounds. I'm going to go ahead and click backgrounds. This is going to show me the free backgrounds. And there are some fantastic options in here. You want a kind of a wood texture in your background, works really well. All of these, I mean, maybe not all of them, most of them work phenomenally well for backgrounds. What I tend to do, for those that are interested, I will add this, either download it for free or add it to my library. So I'm just going to hit download. We will save this, and I'm just going to save this on my desktop as Adobe Stock. Then I'll go to Photoshop. I'll create a new image. I usually use something like 1920 by 1080, which is a nice balance between a fairly big size, but also not so big that it's going to be massive. Because the problem is if I just upload that Adobe Stock image, it is going to be way too big. It's going to be multiple megabytes. So I'm going to embed it in my new image that I've just created. Let's go and find our desktop and go to Adobe Stock. There it is right there, and hit place. We can resize it. Hit return. If I want, I can change some of the colors. Let me just grab a couple of colors here. Let's take this green and this blue. I'll do a gradient swatch over it. Boom, and then change that layer just to color, like that. I can add my logo in one of the corners. We'll save this out by going to Export and Export As. I'm going to choose JPEG. I'm going to knock down the quality a bit so that this isn't so big. Remember, everybody's going to have to load this into your room. 60 tends to work really well. It's still high quality, but we're down to 53K, which is fantastic. I'll hit Export, and we'll call this room background, and what's today? The 21st. So let's go back to the room that we've been working on. I'll go to my preferences and upload an image, browse my computer, go to that same folder we were just looking at. I think it was this manager training. There's room background 21. That's what we just created. I'll hit open. And with these room backgrounds, if you have added a logo, you can pin it to the room so that if your logo is in the bottom left-hand corner, I can pin this background image to my room so that logo never gets cut off. I'm going to hit done, and you can see here I've already started with, I think, a great background. Let's design this lobby by adding some content. I'm going to do this fairly quickly here. So I'm going to add pods using the pods menu. In this case, we'll start with a share pod. I'm going to add in an attendees pod to see who's in the room with me. Maybe add in a pod for playing music. This is a lobby after all. So that's going to be another share pod. It can be quite small though for playing music. Stick that under there. And then I can drag and drop content from my file explorer. So if I go to, I think I had it in my file explorer here, I can take that clock, for example, that I downloaded from that apps page and simply drag it onto my SharePod. I can take the MP3 that I've got for my lobby music and simply drag it onto my SharePod. Let's add another pod for the actual event image that we've created for this. Again, I'll just use the SharePod, position it where I'd like to see it, and then find a event image, drag and drop it right onto the SharePod. I can do things like hide the title bar to make this look even nicer, so that that title bar will go away in a few seconds after I move my mouse out of the pod window itself. Let's make sure that we've got some chat in here. We want to ensure we're, again, starting with interaction. So we'll add a chat pod and maybe a poll pod. Now, I'm not going to fill this poll in right now. I'm just going to leave this as blank because the idea here is we're actually creating a template that we're going to be able to reuse. We're going to give other people access to use this template as well. I'm going to move my lobby layout up to the very top of my layout bar, and let's continue this by creating an introduction layout. Now, for my introduction layout, I mostly want to keep what I have on my lobby layout. So what I'm going to do is duplicate what I've just created with my lobby. We'll call this my intro, and I'll hit create layout. Again, this is going to be my second layout, so I'm just going to drag it up underneath my lobby. And now for my intro, let's get rid of the poll that we've already asked people. Let's get rid of the music because we're ready to start the session. I'm going to drag this down, and I'm going to add a video pod. And again, as the instructor, or as the host in this case, I'm able to drag and drop these pods, place them wherever I'd like. You'll notice there are little alignment tools, these lines, these guidelines that show up to help me make sure that this looks good. These guidelines are your best friends when you're designing these rooms. It helps you make the rooms look fantastic. You'll notice the sharing pod is already part of this layout, something that we could duplicate ourselves. So let's create another, we'll start here with a new layout. We'll call this PowerPoint, or maybe just slides. And this is to share our PowerPoint content. So I'm going to add a new share pod, and we'll make it a little smaller so that we can fit our chat pod on the screen. Chat might be important. We may want our attendees list on here. What I'm going to do, though, is have my users choose either a video to use their video pod, or one of the other options that I often use, and in fact I'm using today, is using something like a virtual name card. You can see I've made one here for Lisa. And this is another option, particularly for those that don't feel comfortable sharing their video all the time. It's really not necessary, especially after an introduction. So in this way, I'm going to design in my room. I'm going to design that learner experience. I'm going to cut this a little short. Let me delete some of these default pods. We're going to just create two more layouts. So let's duplicate this presentation layout, and we're going to call this my polls. For the polls layout, we can get rid of this share pod that we're going to use for the presentation. I'm just going to add some poll pods. The idea here, again, we're encouraging interaction. So let's just add two polls. Using my guidelines to line everything up. And then we'll create another new layout that we're going to call wrap up. And actually, let's just duplicate this polls pod while we're here. We'll call this wrap up. The reason I'm duplicating it is because I just want to keep that chat pod exactly where it was, so that anybody using the chat pod, anybody typing in a message, won't have that just disappear on them or even appear in a different place. And for this wrap up, what I'm going to do is share some files. So I'm going to add a files pod to share any of the resources that we talked about inside of the session. And I'm going to add again, some polls, but these polls are going to be standardized across all of our sessions. So we're going to fill them in, even though we're working on a template. We can continue on from here. So I'm going to move back to our lobby. It's important to move to the first layout when you're creating a template. I'm actually going to close this room. I'm going to just hit the power button here to end this session. I'll end it now. And I'm going to take that, go back to Adobe Connect Central here. So I'm just going to go to my web interface for Adobe Connect, go to my meetings, that room that we just created. Let me sort this by start time so I can find it easily. Here we go. The design workshop template. This is what we just created. I'm going to move this into my templates folder, a folder literally called my templates. If I'm an administrator, I can actually move it into the shared templates folder. In fact, that's what I'm going to do here to make it available to everybody on the Adobe Connect account. What this gives me is the ability to create a brand new session. This is going to be called 11:54, which is the time it is right now. I'm going to choose that template that I just created. What did we call it? The design workshop template. This is a brand new room though. We're even going to call this brand -new. I'll use the rest of the default settings, hit finish, and we'll open this up in a new tab. Let me just copy it again, just so that I can share this. I'm going to paste it into my browser. And you'll see that this brand new room called 11:54, that's never existed before, is automatically taking on the look and the feel of the template that we just created. So what you can do is design some of the basics into your templates, and all of the new rooms that you create will take on the look and the feel of all of those, all of the content, the pods, and the layouts that you've designed. So you can see here the polls that I've added are automatically included. We can do things like upload our own PowerPoint decks by dragging and dropping them onto the share pods. I can swap out Lisa's name card with the presenter's name card. It makes it really fast and easy to go from 0 to 60, if you will, if you're, I guess, North American, by using templates. So put some thought into the design of your rooms and then turn those designs into templates that you can reuse over and over and over again. What I've done today, this is another best practice, I think. Instead of giving you slides, because when we're designing our content, we shouldn't make our slides text heavy. So I've put all of the content from my slides and all of the content from my demonstration into a handout so that you don't, maybe I should have told you this ahead of time, you don't need to take notes. That handout is available over in the Files pod underneath my head. So at the top left-hand corner, you can see the Design-Workshop PDF. You can download this. It includes something I think a lot more useful than having my slides, which are mostly just pictures. This includes all of the notes that we were talking about, all of those interactions that we discussed. And then on the second page, everything that I showed you in terms of the design. The other thing I will put in there right now, I apologize that it's not in there already, is a PDF of that room that I was showing earlier, that manager training room. I've got, for every layout, I've taken a screenshot and I've added those screenshots into a PDF. So you can download that if you want to see the room that I designed. I'm going to move to our closing layouts here as we're getting into the end, but you can still see those files are there. Hopefully that didn't affect anybody. I'd love you to tell me, these are chat pods, so your name may show up if you respond here, but I'd love to tell me what you're going to do to change how you're using interactions going forward in the left-hand chat pod. And in the right-hand chat pod, tell me about any changes that you may make to design and how you think about design going forward after today's session. Erica's saying templates. I'm glad to hear that. Templates are one of those hidden gems that not everybody knows about, but they help you get started so much more quickly. And the default templates that come with Adobe Connect have to be generic because they have to serve every purpose. But as you think about your organization and your account, you can really customize those to go, go forward, go faster, and add design to all of the sessions that you're creating. Seeing a lot of people saying QuizPod in improving interactions. Love hearing that because I designed the QuizPod. I love that as a way to add kind of game-based learning into a lot of my sessions. Amazing lobby. I love having a lobby that sets expectations. I think that's so important. It is the first thing that people are going to see. You are setting that first expectation. So think about your lobby. Think about what you want to design something in there. Cleo's saying games, polls, and quizzes. That's fantastic. We are using an interactive technology here. So think about that as you're designing your experiences. Don't think of your audience as viewers. Think of them as participants. That's why we call them participants in the attendees list. They should participate. Bring them into participation. Karen, love the GIF looping idea. I'm assuming that one of the Adobe colleagues mentioned that. Yeah, in addition to JPEG and PNG, we now support GIFs, so you can have a looping GIF. Even if that's just to show somebody how to use something like the status options menu. It's a great idea. Ashley saying name card, backgrounds. Images are such a great way to make your content look good. I'd encourage you to take advantage of the free stuff up on those stock sites, including stock.adobe.com. There's lots of great starting points that you can use. Thank you for filling this out. We are right close to the top of the hour, so I'm going to move to my final layout. Again, those files are still there. Those have shifted just slightly. But the design workshop PDF is everything that we talked about today. The facilitator's guide is from Lightbulb Moment and Joe Cook. I really, really support using that to design your sessions ahead of time. And the Manager Training Room PDF is essentially a screenshot of every layout that I went through with that Manager Training Room. If you could take a second to help us understand how we can improve these sessions, really, really appreciate it. Let us know how we did today and how we can improve in the future. Thank you, everybody, for joining the session today. I really hope you found it valuable. If you did, you may want to consider joining us for the second and third workshops that we're hosting. The second one is going to be all about breakout rooms, how you can create collaborative exercises. And the third one is going to be on creating events, setting up microsites to promote your events, creating beautiful emails to send people invitations and follow-ups. Thanks everybody for joining today, and we'll see you later. Have a great day. Bye-bye.